Hey there everybody, this is Matthew Naiman from Shutterstock.com, and today we're looking at the Arctic collection. Arctic is a collection of over 75 high-quality visual effects plates, all captured optically in 4K. Plates from the Arctic collection are compatible with any nonlinear editing system, but today we're going to start by taking a look at Arctic in Adobe After Effects, Adobe Premiere Pro, and Final Cut Pro. Why don't we get started? Here we are in Adobe After Effects, and we're going to take a look at a shot of this cozy lady sitting on a couch drinking something warm. Immediately, I can see one issue with this shot is that it's a moving shot. There's a pan and a tilt in it, kind of a compound move, so there's going to be some motion tracking involved. And we have a foreground, which is the woman, and we have a background, which is the out-of-focus snowy area, and we're probably only going to want the snow to show up in the background, so we're going to want to find a way to hold out this foreground over the background. But why don't we start with motion tracking? Motion tracking this shot should be relatively simple. We're going to select our base layer, go over to Track Motion, and After Effects is going to pop us out a nice little track point. I'm going to find an area of relatively small detail, expand the search area a little bit, and let's run the track until it won't run no more. Let's manually stop it there because we're about to lose that track point. Now we're going to want to shift our track point to somewhere else. The only other points I see that are really useful for us as a track point are probably these out of focus spots on the glass. So I'm going to hold Alt. First I'm going to expand it a bit so I have something to grab, and then I'm going to hold Alt. Because I held Alt, you'll see that our track reference stays in the exact same place, and as long as I hold Alt while I'm moving our point, I'm free to reposition it on anything and continue a track after losing an initial point. I'm going to select that little circle of confusion and keep going. Looks like the track's holding pretty well, but as the focus pulls I see the track point shrinks, so I'm going to shrink our search area, recenter it, and let's keep going. Now I notice that we just lost our track because there's an out of focus branch in the background blowing in the wind. So I'm actually going to undo with Command Z, and I'm going to shift up to a higher track point, again holding Alt, change the search box region, and continue our track. And that should run pretty problem. Excellent. Got a track for the whole shot. The next thing I'm going to do is go up to Layer, New, Null Object. And I'm going to jump back over to our tracking window, edit target, and then apply to the null. So, as you can see, we now have a null that stays tracked exactly where our original tracking point was, which is great. So, why don't we throw a little bit of snow in here and hook it up to our track. Back over in our project panel, we have some snow selected. I'm going to drag it on top. I'm also going to go back and rename our null because I like keeping things named properly. Track null. As you can see, the snow plate is much bigger than our composition because our main composition footage is 1080p and the snow is all filmed in glorious 4K. Let's make it a little smaller, and I'm going to switch the blending mode to screen so that we can see our footage behind it and make sure we're covering the whole thing. That'll be pretty close. Now I'm going to parent that to the track null, and let's see if we need to make our plate a little bigger. No, that seems to cover the entire area of the window very, very nicely. And I'm going to hit play so we can look at our track. And as you can see, the snow tracks with the camera beautifully. But as you can see, it's snowing on this person, and that's a problem we need to solve. So let's figure out how to put our talent in the foreground in front of the snow with a minimal amount of work. The way we're going to do that is duplicate our base layer, drop it in front of our snow, and rename it foreground. We're also going to duplicate that again and call this foreground matte. We're going to want to take our foreground matte, and the effect we're going to run on it is keying key light. Now, key light is typically a great plugin for using if you're doing green screening or keying, but we're going to use it in a slightly different way than one would typically use it. So just kind of follow along. We're going to select our screen color selector, and we're going to go for something that's sort of in the intermediate blue-green level. And as you can see, it's kind of like looks crappy, and you can't really pull a green screen on this footage because there's not enough information. But if I go from final result and change our view mode to screen matte, what you'll see is we start getting a black and white representation of the matte that we're generating. I'm going to start pulling around some of these attributes. I'm going to bump up the screen gain, I'm going to bump up the screen gain a whole bunch. I'm going to set our blur level to about 14 because we don't need nice sharp edges. And then I'm going to twirl open the screen mat and bring up the robustness of our foreground. and then just try and kill as much of the background as possible. So what you can see I've done here is very similar to a threshold effect. I've kind of just created a stark white outline of our foreground subject matter with some garbage around the edge. But what this would make is this would make a really nice Luma matte. So I'm just going to disable the layer so we can't see it. And then I'm going to go to foreground and I'm going to go to track matte, Luma matte. So this is now grabbing a Luma matte from our keyed layer up top. And as you can see immediately, it actually does a reasonable job keeping the foreground and knocking out the background. Because after applying our key light effect, our foreground almost exclusively is pure white and our background almost exclusively is pure black. The only exceptions, if we go back to final result, are the areas that are skin toned because those are the areas that we worked to not key out. Jump back to screen matte, try that layer, and let's just watch it and see where we're at. As you can see, for the most part, that's doing a pretty good job getting our foreground matted out. I'm going to add a little bit of manual masking to this just to clean up some of the edges. As you can see, we sort of have a little bit of snow on top of the curtain, and the tree is occluding the snow because it didn't mat out. The way I'm going to do this is I'm going to create a new solid. We're going to call this Snow Cleanup. Doesn't matter what color we make it, so I'm just going to make it a nice contrasty color. And I'm going to lower the opacity. And I'm going to scale it up so that it covers our entire move. I'm then going to parent it to the track null. And I'm going to trace out a really, really rough garbage mat around our woman. I'm going to pop back a little bit, and I'm going to trace a really, really rough garbage mat around our lantern, and generate a garbage mat around the couch. And you'll see, because we've tracked our solid layer to our track null, we don't have to do a lot of tedious animating of this mask to keep it in the right spot. It's just in the right spot. I'm going to drag this out a little bit more so that it includes the woman, covers her hand, and drag this out a little bit behind her head so we don't cut any of her off. Excellent. Now I'm just going to press F, twirl open my mask options, give all of these a nice feather, and I'm going to grab our foreground matte and our foreground, pre-compose them together, matted foreground, and then use this matte with the opacity turned all the way back up. Great. I'm going to go to matted foreground, select track matte, alpha matte, and now you'll see that snow pops back on over the tree. One of the only things left to do is ice and snow, effect, Gaussian blur, and I get the feeling that the curtain on the left is still not cooperating with our snow. So we're going to generate one more solid. Let's move it over to where the curtain is. Block it out. Call this curtain matte. Attach it to our null. And let's just do an alpha invert so that it can't show up anywhere that isn't. There you go. And as you can see, relatively quickly, we can get a really nice convincing composite. Really didn't take a lot of time. Makes the shot much cozier. I'm a fan. Also, is it just me, or does she look a bit like Sansa Stark? Clearly, winter is here. Okay, let's move on to Premiere Pro and take a look at using some Arctic elements in that. Alright, here we are in Adobe Premiere Pro, and as you can see, we have this great clip of this little bird coming and landing on someone's hand. I can only assume this person is a Disney princess of some kind, or a witch that can conjure animal friends in the forest. Regardless, our task is to add some snow to this shot, so let's get started. We're going to jump over to our assets, and we're probably going to want to find the right kind of clip for us to be using. So we've got some sort of light, blowy, icy snow, and we've got some gentle snowfall, and I think we're going to need one of each. So why don't I grab that, and why don't I grab some ice blowing? Wonderful. I'm also going to change our workspace here just back to the default editing because I find it a little bit easier to find my way around. Wonderful. So the base effect here is actually incredibly easy. We're actually just going to grab our gentle snowfall and drag it on top of our footage. And as you can see, it's much larger than our footage, so we can either scale it down or right-click on it and click Set to Frame Size. But I'm actually going to scale it up a little bit because this is going to be our foreground element. And we're just going to jump over to Blend Mode and set this to Screen. And immediately it knocks out all the black, keeps the white, and we have some falling snow. But this isn't a particularly convincing effect because we have sort of very small pieces of snow falling in front of this very small bird, and the perspective is just wrong. So we're actually going to use this ice and snow just as a bit of a foreground layer. I'm going to jump into my effects panel, and I'm going to search for blur, and let's throw a little bit of a Gaussian blur on the snow, just to kind of give it a more out of focus foreground feel. And we're going to scale it up. And let's take a look at that. It's a bit less of a problem, but I feel like this side of the snow is less dense than this side of the snow and might make a better foreground element on such an obviously small object. So I'm going to jump over to Effects, and I'm going to look for Horizontal Flip, throw it on the footage, and I think that's going to look slightly better. Keep the less dense part on top of our subject. Great. However, I get the feeling that we also really want some of this light blowing stuff playing a little bit more in focus, slightly further back into space. We're going to take it, throw it on top of our footage, but underneath our gently falling snow. And let's go Blend Mode, Screen, and just see where we're at. So we've got some small, gently blowing snow, a little bit more in focus. Looks pretty good to me. But I think there's something neat we can do here. I'm going to take our base layer, copy it, and drop it on top of our blowing snow, and shy our bigger, chunkier foreground snow for now. I think this footage is contrasty enough with the white in the background and the darker bird and tree. I think we can do something kind of neat here with an effect called the threshold effect. So I'm going to drop a threshold onto this footage, and as you can see, the threshold immediately starts knocking things down to their like component black and white layers. I'm going to amp it up until this tree and this bird and this hand are basically pure black, and then we have pure white in the background. And then I'm going to nest this effect, and we're going to call this foreground matte. And then on our ice blowing snow layer, I'm going to search for another effect called Track Matte Key. And I'm going to drop it on there. Now, under the Track Matte key, you can see we have some options, which matte we want to use, and what compositing method we want to use. What a track matte does is it lets us use another layer in the comp as a way of knocking out parts of this layer to either be opaque or transparent. So I have our matte on video 3, so I'm going to go ice blowing snow, matte, video 3, and instead of alpha, I'm going to set that to luma, and as you can see, we get these like bizarre knockouts on the layer. The reason for this is because our layer is different size. You can see we sort of have this bird silhouette shape here that's being knocked out, but it's not doing exactly what we want. This is because our ice blowing snow layer is not the same size as our project, even though we've already nested this. I'm going to just copy our track matte key for later use. I'm going to nest our ice blowing snow layer, snow nest, and then just paste that effect back on top, and now you can see everything fits perfectly. The snow mostly shows through in the area behind the bird and behind the trees, that's going to be a much, much more convincing effect. Now I want to take my snow nest, change the blending mode to screen, and re-enable my foreground snow. Also, lower the opacity of my foreground snow a little bit because it's a bit too present. I'm going to set an out key. And let's take a look. There you go. As you see, we've added some foreground snow. We've added some smaller, wispier background snow. And I think that's a much more attractive shot now than when we started. Why don't we jump over to Final Cut Pro and have a look at how we can do something similar in that piece of software. Alright everybody, and finally here we are in Final Cut Pro, and it looks like we've returned to the genre of a woman sitting in window drinking warm stuff looking out at the winter. Very nice shot. We have sort of a slight camera move on it, but I don't think that's going to be too much of a problem. And our task here is to put snow out the window but not on top of our subject. So let's get started. I'm just going to grab some gentle snowfall and drag it onto our timeline. And as always, let's go set our blending mode to screen, just so we can have a look generally at how things are shaping up. Looks like the speed of the snow and the speed of our subject is a pretty good match. And because of the slow drift and the slow camera move, we're not going to notice any movement between the two of them, so I don't think we need to bother attempting to keyframe animation onto this. I am going to take our snow, move up to our transform tools, and just scale it a little bit, and drag it into a more appropriate spot on the footage, just so that it stays mostly over the window. Great. Now, the way that we're going to key this footage into the window is we're going to duplicate our footage of our woman and chuck it on the timeline, and we're going to search in our effects for an effect called Threshold. So let's drop our Threshold effect on our footage and have a look at what Threshold does. So, as you can see, by dragging around sliders and Threshold, you can start to change what the footage considers to be a maximum value for light and dark. So we're going to want to try and knock out all the dark stuff to be pure dark and as much of the light stuff to be pure light as possible. We're almost certainly not going to have any success on that door or that window, but I don't think it's going to make too much of a difference to the overall shot. Yeah, probably something around there is going to make for a convincing composite. And I'm going to grab this footage, drop it on top, and then I'm going to change the blend mode to Stencil Luma. So what Stencil Luma is going to do is it is going to knock out everything below based on the luminance value. So as you can see, it is showing snow in the lighter parts and then just pure black in the darker parts, which is great. To get it to show through our footage below, all we have to do is select the two of them together, right-click, and select New Compound Clip. Alrighty, change the blending mode to screen, and with just a couple of clicks we have a fairly convincing composite of some snow outside the window. I could go in and do some manual keyframe masking to get that door and those windows back, but I think you guys get the idea. That's it for me today. For more great stock footage and VFX plates, and for more tutorials like this one, you can visit RocketStock.com. I'm Matthew Naiman, and all this snow is making me want to go chill. Get it? Chill? You guys always give me such an icy reception. Icy? No, nothing? Okay, I'm done.